Welcome to Asian Book Club, where we highlight Asian and Asian American authors. We are your hosts,
Jamae and Sabangan.
and I'm Stephen Park. And today we bring you Read 3 of Aloha Vietnam by Elizabeth Nguyen. We have just finished this book. It was a lot heavier as it got towards the end, but I think there were a lot of concepts that were meant to be carried over into personal life experiences, one of which is the epilogue that she decided to write, which was a quote. The quote reads, "When the parent's generation eats salt, the child's generation thirsts for water." Did you think anything of this when you first encountered it?
When I first encountered it, I first thought that it was linked back to needing the parents' generation. Like there was a need to continuously look for the parents' generation because they're the reasons why we feel the things we feel today.
Hmm. I think when I first read it, I didn't really understand it. It took me a while to sit and think and ruminate with it
Mm-hmm.
before I actually thought of what I thought, which was very similar to what Dr. Nguyen's epilogue is about.
Mm-hmm.
For me, where it slightly differs is that it almost seems like what this quote is saying is that it takes the sacrifice of the parents' generations so that we can thirst and crave and try to gain more. Like,
Mm.
salt seems like something that wears down, it seems like something that degrades and is just fatiguing in a sense.
Hmm.
Whereas when we think of water, especially after salt, it brings life, it brings a new, like in my brain, imagery comes up with plants growing and like a lush forest coming out from something. So the way I interpreted this wording was when the parents struggle, it gives the children a chance to grow and nourish and thrive, which in this case and in this book, it was Xuan leaving Vietnam and having to abandon her own family, her heritage, her culture, or at least that's how she felt, so that On can blossom and kind of figure out who she is as a person.
For sure. I definitely rethought about it after a while, and definitely it's this cyclical nature where when parents need to give up something or eat salt, then the children will be able to find things beyond what they were able to beforehand.
Right. And it's not just a scenario of giving up something big. I think it leads to the conversation of just parents sacrificing, which is just their sacrificing of sleep for the first 2 years. Their sacrificing of their own money, their own time. What they give to the child is what they no longer can give to themselves, which is the ability and availability for self care a little bit so that they can care for their prosperity.
For sure.
Well, we'll get further into the book. I think that quote very specifically held such value in what I was thinking that I kind of wanted to bring it up as our topic.
Mm-hmm.
But as always, after our topic, we're going to go into our recommendation for the week.
Our recommendation for the week is An Thuy Nguyen. An is a Vietnamese American artist whose primary source material is her identity, cultural experiences, and immigration story. She creates art through photography, video, installation, and performance art. Her work can be characterized by their striking yet familiar imagery. You can learn more about An Thuy's work through her website at anthuyNuyen.com. That's on ANH dash Thuy THUY Nguyen NGUYEN.com, and find her on Instagram at on underscore Thuy Nguyen.
Yep, and that's going to be our recommendation for the week. Okay, so on to our third and last read of Aloha Vietnam by Dr. Elizabeth Nguyen. We have just read pages 152 through 223, which were chapter 33, Xuan, 1993, through chapter 50, On, 1997, plus the epilogue. What have we learned up till this point?
Up till this point, An experiences another manic episode, which leads to her second hospitalization. She, her parents, and Dr. Tanaka help her find ways to get back on her feet as she transitions into college. And before we get into this particular section, know that there are a couple trigger warnings, which are a suicide attempt and death.
Yep, and it's a lot within the story, especially with us circling around the topic of mental health. And this read in particular, just there's much more abruptness to those topics that we just talked about, which were suicide attempt and death.
Mm-hmm.
So let's kind of go straight into it because that's where we start off with this whole third read.
Yes.
Anna's struggling through college. She's gaining more anxieties because her classes aren't going the way that she expected them to go.
Mm-hmm.
Even the healing with the arts class, which she was hoping was going to be this enlightening space that she can find her art in and kind of find herself in, that didn't quite go the way that she was hoping that it would go. And so it leads to on going through another phase of no longer taking her medication.
Mm-hmm. And she just spirals from there.
Right. And spirals enough that this is where we have to talk about that suicide attempt. So On puts herself in a position where she is genuinely just trying to end it all.
Mm-hmm.
And luckily, there are people around her because it's the dorm room, and we can only assume they're the ones that take her to the hospital. And from there, the medical team is able to save her, and she finds herself awakening to her third hospitalization.
Exactly. And this time, when she's transferred into the psychiatric ward, it's the adult ward, where it's definitely a different atmosphere.
Right. This kind of is what accumulates On's experience in college or
Mm-hmm.
university at UC Davis.
Yes.
Her college experience seems to only accentuate her mental health struggles.
Mm-hmm.
And within that, what we see is On's attempt to try to figure out the rest of this on her own because she no longer has her parents. She no longer even has her brother, who isn't like a massive resource for her.
No.
But I think more importantly, she no longer has Dr. Tanaka, who's maybe one of the few people she's actually confided in throughout all this.
For sure. And Dr. Tanaka was such a strong support system for An that I'm surprised that An couldn't find or didn't find anyone to continue confiding in.
Well, we knew how hard it was for her to even confide in Dr. Tanaka.
True.
And Dr. Tanaka kind of placed herself in a position that she was able to eventually earn the trust of An. Whereas An in this new space, like, I don't know if she would ever go and seek that help for herself.
That's fair. I mean, when I think about my college experience, I wish that I got therapy, but I was always afraid. I was afraid to go to the counseling services, which were free for us. I was afraid to ask about it from my doctor because at that time I was still under my parents' insurance and I didn't want them to find out. So I can see where Aunt's coming from.
Yeah, and I mean, when I was in college, I didn't even go to the counselor to help me figure out how to register for classes.
Mm,
I think at that age and with that mindset, at least for me, I wasn't seeking out those resources because I may not even have known that they existed,
mm,
nor was I maybe ready to even go through that step and that process of trying to talk to them.
fair.
One resource that she does get that is this eternal, infinite bond that is beyond the length of time and spiritual worlds is from her mother.
Mm-hmm.
So Xuan from Hawaii gets a sense that An is not doing well, and that's when she ends up pushing her way to Davis so that she can take care of An. From there, An starts to feel better, but not quite better enough to feel like she can resume college.
Right. She didn't feel like she can stand on her own 2 feet at that point.
Yep. And so she goes back and live with her parents. She tries again. Pretty much this section of the read is a lot about how Anna's struggling. It's
Mm-hmm.
talking about how her life seems to not be able to get on the right path. Like a cart that's trying to get on a train track, but his wheels are just wobbling and just never able to stabilize.
Right.
As much as Schwann's trying to help, as much as Dr. Tanaka has tried to set her up, this is the struggle that I think someone with mental health might have, or even without mental health. If you're going into a new space and you feel all alone, everything that you recognize as home is away from you.
Mm-hmm.
I can fully understand why An is no longer feeling like herself in this space and is trying to find something.
For sure. She does end up living on her own, though. And while she's living on her own, she starts to reconnect with her artistry. She restarts painting. She restarts finding a little bit of herself again.
Yeah, and if we skip to the end, as she starts going through her individual processes, she is able to find herself again through art. She goes through this community class. She's now participating in helping at a facility where there are people that also need help with their mental health issues. And this becomes On story. It's sort of an ending to the tale, but without an actual end. It's
Mm,
kind of the beginning for On to hopefully find out who she becomes as a person.
absolutely.
So, what do you think of On's transformation? Or, I guess, I mean, I don't even know if it's a transformation or just a journey.
I feel like it was a journey in that she didn't get a chance to change all that much throughout the book, especially because she kept continuously regressing in her mental health journey. But by the end, when she finally grasped that art was her gateway to herself, going back to not only herself as a person, but back to the source of where her mental health issues came from, I think that's when she started to grow as a character and to develop more.
Yeah, I agree. It seemed much more like a journey. It seemed like a story where she didn't really move to cross a finish line,
Mm-hmm.
but she was moving.
Right.
We truly don't know where On's story goes from here. We don't know if she gets all the way better. We don't know if she continues to struggle with the mental health. But what we do know is that she is able to stop taking the medication, and her healing through art is seemingly sustainable so that she can feel like herself again.
Exactly.
So I think a sort of a happy ending.
Mm-hmm.
The not so happy part about this ending is what happens through On's journey. And that's when On gets a call from Hawaii, from her father, about her mom's passing.
Mm-hmm. And it was a very sudden passing because of a car accident.
Right. Did you see this coming at all?
No, I didn't see this coming. I did think that something tragic would happen, but I didn't know that it would happen to Schwan.
I had no idea this was coming. I want to say hit by a car, but that seems like it's not the appropriate wording to use for this instance.
I mean, it's kind of appropriate.
It was just such a shock. Like,
Mm-hmm.
Schwan was such a big character, and not only was On finding herself, but Schwan was finding herself.
True.
And I guess, in a sense, after her passing, we get a chapter within the apparition, I guess, of Schwan, like within her spirit. And she does find peace within this whole story. She
Mm-hmm.
does help guide On to this temple within this mythical realm. So I guess there is some rounding back to Schwan's character kind of feeling whole again.
For sure.
But I definitely wasn't ready for it. I know as I was reading it, it took a lot of emotions out of me.
Hmm. I don't know. I feel like even though I didn't know it was gonna happen to Schwan, when the phone call came, I knew that somebody had passed.
Mm.
And the fact that Schwan's apparition comes back in the read shows us that her belief in Buddhism comes back around and is true for her.
So it was the phone call that made you realize that something bad was going to happen.
I already knew that there was something tragic happening, but when the phone call came, I knew that someone had passed away.
And this is why we don't answer phone calls, so that no one passes away. We also see the passing of her grandmother, which was much more briefly described, which she was always kind of like a background character.
Hmm.
But I think the reason they do mention that part is to intensify the loneliness that Ann is going through, because those were her two support systems.
Right.
Like, her mom was her social and her mental support system, where Banoi was her physical and her spiritual well being and space of safety.
Mm-hmm.
The very, very end of this book shows the remembrance for Schwan. It shows An talking to her brother. It shows them trying to figure things out with her father. But there isn't quite a joyful feeling coming out of this book.
Right. It felt a little more like solemn. It felt more thought provoking. It felt as if it was bringing us back into ourselves rather than trying to take us out.
Which I think was maybe what the author was trying to do.
For sure.
I don't think she was trying to fluff up what the diagnosis was. I don't think she was trying to make a light story out of something that is such a serious situation.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm assuming that by creating a story and not having it just come to a happy ending, exactly what you said is it's putting the thought back into your brain so that you can really think about it and sit with it for a while.
Absolutely.
What were your takeaways from this book, if you had any?
I think my biggest takeaway is that everyone's mental health journey is different. And I knew this, but experiencing it through An's character reminded me that not everyone's journey, not only with mental health, but with medication, is not going to be consistent. It's not going to always be once the doctor gives you the medication, then you take it and that's it forever and ever. Amen. It could be where you start to feel better and then get off it, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And I guess that's my biggest takeaway, that not everyone's journey, mental health or otherwise, is going to be the same.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I think the only thing I would add in is the use of perspective in this book, because when we see the viewpoint of Schwan, when we see the viewpoint of Dr. Tanaka as someone who's trying to care for An, we get better understanding of the caregivers who are going through this process with that individual. It sometimes just feels so alone as the person that's carrying all this weight and burden, but we also have to understand how heavy this is a journey for those around the person that they care for.
Exactly.
As we finish up this book, I guess we always talk about who we would recommend this book to. Did you have anyone in mind particularly?
No one specific. Actually, I take that back. I thought about someone in my life who also struggles with mental health, similar to my experience. But what's different is that, like On, they struggle with the medication portion. And I think this will affirm, if not allow them to feel like they're not alone.
Right. And I think for me, this is the first book that I don't think I would recommend just to everybody.
Right.
It's not that it's not a great story, it's just the story seems very particular for its purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Like the person I would recommend this book to is someone that might struggle with mental health currently, or people that have someone that they know that are struggling with mental health and just trying to figure out like how to help them in certain ways.
Absolutely.
What this book does is it gives such beautiful understanding of what people and their support systems are going through as they're going through these crises, or just maybe not even crisis, but this overall journey.
Yes, absolutely.
It's not to say that this book isn't well written. There's such beautiful descriptions, there's wonderful storytelling. I actually really enjoyed this book because, like I said, I got to see different perspectives, and On story was so unique. And yeah, I never even thought about the fact that medication doesn't work for everyone, and that's a journey in itself.
Mm-hmm.
So just this book alone could help someone that maybe has tried the medication one time and then has given up and then just feels like you'll never help them again. So
Right.
hopefully this kind of reaches out to people that might need it.
Absolutely. Hopefully so.
This is the story of An, of Xuan, a little bit of Dr. Tanaka, but this book was Aloha Vietnam by Dr. Elizabeth Nguyen. You take away what you want from the book. I think that's always going to be the case. For us, it was definitely a poignant conversation to have
Mm-hmm.
and something that was very thoughtful, especially in our lives. So I'm very happy that we were able to get through this book.
Definitely. And we're thankful to Dr. Nguyen and her publicity team for gifting us a physical copy of Aloha Vietnam.
Yep. All right. Everyone, I think just take a deep breath in and then out, because hopefully the next book is a lot lighter.
We hope so.
So we're going to go into our next book. This is a book where, like, we're always trying to be transparent.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a book that the author reached out to us and recommended to us. So it seems like what we kind of need right now, especially after two heavier books that we
Yes.
just finished. And before we tell you the title of the book, what are our three hints?
Our first hint is that the book deals with the cutthroat Silicon Valley tech world. Our second hint is the main character is a fashion writer who switches over to a tech career. And our third hint is that the author also wrote The Fraud Squad.
Yep. And our book is going to be,
Valley Verified by Kyla Zhao.
yeah. And so let's find out a little bit more about the book by reading the back cover.
The back cover reads, on paper, Zoe Zhang has made it in New York's fashion world. After a string of unpaid internships, she's now a fashion columnist at Chic, lives in a quaint apartment in Manhattan, and gets invited to exclusive industry events. But life in New York City isn't as chic as Zoe imagined. Her editor wants her to censor her opinions to please the big brands. She shares her quaint, read small, apartment with three roommates who never let her store kimchi in the fridge. And how is she supposed to afford the designer clothes expected for those parties on her meager salary? Then, one day, Zoe receives a job offer at Fitpic, an app startup based in Silicon Valley. The tech salary and office perks are sweet, but moving across the country, switching to a totally new industry, and leaving everything and everyone she knows behind, not so much. However, with her current career at a dead end, Zoe accepts the offer and swaps high fashion for high tech, haute couture for HTML. But she soon realizes that in industry claiming to change the world for the better, not everyone's intentions are pure. With an 8-figure investment on the line, Zoe must find a way to revamp FitPic's image despite Silicon Valley's elitism, and her icy colleagues, or the company's future will go up in smoke, and hers with it.
Yeah, and let's find out a little bit more about the author. So, Kyla Zhao is a native Singaporean who moved to California to study at Stanford University. She has previously worked in the fashion industry, writing for Vogue and Harper's Bazaar in Singapore, and she now works at a tech company in Silicon Valley. So we're going to get into this book. We're breaking this book up into 4 reads. And within this first read, we're going to be reading pages 1 through 93, which are chapters 1 through 12. So no chapter titles on this one. So we'll mainly be discussing this by the chapter numbers. Now, for anyone that wants to further discuss Aloha Vietnam, if you found it enlightening or helpful in some way, we'd love to hear about it. Because we also love to know that the books that we're all reading together are hopefully giving some form of enlightenment or some form of pleasure, joy, whatever it is that you're feeling, even if it's sadness that you need at that time. But we're hoping that you enjoyed that book as much as we did. So, how can people reach out to us?
You can reach out to us through email at asianbookclubpod@gmail.com or through Instagram at asianbookclubpod.
Yep, and we also have our website, which is asianbookclubpod.com, that has our bookshop with books that we've read in the past, books that we recommend, and books that we plan to read in the future.
And a great way to support us is to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast.
Otherwise, make sure to be happy, be healthy, and read a book.
Ingat. Bye.
Bye.